Welcome back to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Allie Dahl, Peter Hostrasser. What's new, Allie? What's going on?
Well, I have, I think, a really good setup for our guest today, just to like really dive right in because I'm excited.
Yeah.
But our guest is, and I would say, an expert on like school culture and everything. And I was thinking about before doing this podcast, my experience with leadership in the schools. And I was thinking about like good principals and um, people who I worked closely with who were on the admin level. And I was also thinking about bad ones and what kind of the differences were. And I remember thinking about how the ones I really loved working with made me feel like I was important and valued. They wanted to know who I was and like not like they just knew things about my life and like remembered them, and it was always welcoming and exciting. And I say all this, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Beth Middendorf, who was probably my favorite admin I ever worked with. And this is we're gonna probably dig into some of this, but I just wanted to set the stage for our listeners to like preface this podcast with school leadership is really, really a huge part of education. And like think about the experiences that you loved and didn't love as we're kind of like getting into this episode, because it's that's where we're going, just to kind of set it up.
Totally make or break your culture, and we're going to unpack that today. Our guest is Dr. TJ Vari. He's a senior director of product strategy at Maya Learning, recognized thought leader. I love that thought leader, and regarding college and career readiness, and addresses topics ranging from social and emotional learning to micro credentials to advanced work, coursework for our high school students. His mission is to ensure that all students have a post-secondary plan that brings them joy and success as graduates from high school and college. A former deputy superintendent, and there's so much more in there. I love there's nothing about grades and test scores. Dr. TJ Vari. TJ, what's going on, man?
I'm happy to be here, man. I'm excited to have a conversation with you guys on wide-ranging topics. Allie, critical school leadership, I think it's the key piece. Leaders out there, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you're in charge of your professional development and your professional learning. Don't let anybody else be in charge of it. Just take the reins.
Yeah, man, I really like that. Just to set the stage at the ACTE conference in San Antonio in 2024, I was pulled up on stage by the awesome Christy Valesky and said, "You need to get on here in the panel." And sitting right next to me was TJ. We struck up a brief conversation. I was like, "That's it. Need to be on the podcast." So. So tell us a little bit about you've gone through English teacher, I believe, and then all the way went through the ranks, all the way up to a deputy superintendent. I say up because that's just the old traditional way of looking at things. So I'm going to guess you were pretty much a horizontal leader. Talk to us about like your pathway in education and what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I was a transplant. I was a restaurant manager before I was an educator. And then I parlayed that experience into becoming a high school English teacher in a CTE only high school system. So four high schools. And I taught English, Howard High School of Technology in Wilmington here. It's a famous school, actually. And I was able to use my knowledge of industry and what it takes to be an industry leader, and I was using that in an English classroom with kids so that we could do things like resume building and essay writing and communication skills way before anybody was talking about durable skills. And then I just put my head down and did the work. Like I tell people all the time, haven't applied for a job. Like I became the department chair of one of the bigger high schools in Delaware because the assistant superintendent knocked on my door and said, "We need a department chair." And then I was doing this work at Yale University, building this program at University of Delaware to mimic what they were doing. And we were meeting with superintendents throughout the state. And I found out there was an opening for an administrator in a neighboring district and went to work there as an assistant principal. And then as you'd have it, that school under No Child Left Behind wasn't doing so hot. So after the principal retired, they promoted me to principal. That's when they told me the model was if you can't turn this around in 12 months, we're going to fire you and 50% of the staff. So day one. And so that was fun to turn that school around. They got promoted to assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent. Last 10 years, real focus on college and career readiness, getting kids who wouldn't have otherwise gone to school into school and possibly for free, and getting kids who wanted to go to Cornell and had the means to do it to be able to do that. And now I work at Maya Learning, also kind of serendipitous. I have a leadership development company. You mentioned we've written 6 books. I was doing a keynote at a conference and ran into the CEO. The rest is history. We do college and career planning for students worldwide. We're in 72 countries and 58 languages. And so I get to work with folks all over about what the next best thing is to do to prepare kids for college and career. So that's as fast as I can say it. That's as fast as I could say it. So sorry about that.
Oh, no, all good. We got lots of questions.
I like the turning point. I want to know more about, you said on day one of being a principal, I was told I got 12 months to turn it around or I'm gone. So like, what did you do? If it was already a failing school,
What happened?
like you had to have done something disruptive in my mind. If you're going from a failing school to like growing that district and to being one of the top growing districts in Delaware, like walk us through what happened.
Yeah, so the whole story really is that when I was growing up in the restaurant industry, I started to work for a corporate entity that bought a bunch of restaurants that weren't doing well. And my job was to go into them and in 14 weeks, live in a hotel and turn the restaurants around and get them back up to making money. So I was, 14 weeks is not a lot of time. 12 months kind of is. Now, it's hard to turn the school around. So I will tell you that I used a lot of what I learned from corporate restaurant management as a school leader, but simple stuff. I mean, what did we do? We spent as much time as we could in the most important spaces in the school, which is the classroom. So that was number one. We visited every teacher every week with feedback every time, and we gave the teachers the feedback before we left the room. So we could spend a whole hour talking about just that. This was 12 years ago, I want to say, and we were doing restorative practices. I can't take credit for all of this, right? My assistant was the one who brought the restorative practices in, and we studied instructional strategies. What strategies have the highest effect size? And so we implemented things that we knew would work, and we held our feet to the fire, and we held everybody else's feet to the fire. So accountability was at the top of the list. And a lot of that stuff's not like flashy, but I'm into doing what works, finding what the research says and doing what works.
It's the common sense thing that I think we sometimes miss. Like we get so embedded into like our own little worlds in education. I mean, especially in the secondary area where, Ellie and I come from, it's just people get right down into it. There's one thing that I really liked. You were talking about the Yale programs and then you were mimicking like stuff that works. I know when I was building business departments in previous schools, it was all about, well, let's just look at MBA programs that are working, that are awesome, and then let's just do this in high school. Can you unpack like some of those like major moments of, I don't know why more people don't do this. Maybe I don't know. I just sit around sometimes and we talk to our innovative people and we're like, what are other people doing? Because there are answers out there. So yeah, can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Again, this isn't flashy, but
Sure.
We did real professional learning communities. Like we studied what professional learning communities do, the 4 questions from the 4. A lot of people think they're at a professional learning community and they're really planning a field trip. And so that's not a PLC. So we brought data. We discussed every single student, every individual student and what their needs were. We aligned the curriculum. It wasn't aligned. It's that angered people at the time, by the way. And,
Right.
and I think a lot of people have done this work since then. But, I told 2 teachers at one time that they needed to teach the same lessons in the same order, or else their PLC wasn't going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't care, like at the time, I didn't dictate like what the curriculum needed to be or even what the lessons needed to be. But just in the alignment of that, they were talking about their work, they were meeting on a regular basis, they were unfolding lessons together, and just things like that, small things, I think make a huge difference. We're still light years away from a lot of that in schools, especially here in the States, where one teacher's teaching one type of algebra one and another teacher's teaching another type of algebra one. And then sometimes they're using a different assessment to determine, if the students are learning or not. And I would get simple. And that's kind of like a motto of mine is like, let's find out what works and make it really, really easy for people.
Yeah.
So you said before we started recording, which we should have just recorded then, but you're like, if we change education, we got to like change everything. And so like, even though you were in the traditional system for many years and built, a whole career out of it, like what would you do things differently if you like could go back in time? Like, how would you disrupt now? Or like, yes, those are hot topics and the basics of education are there, but like now and kind of the work that you do with school leadership and your perspective, like in just the wisdom you've gained over time, what would you do differently now in order to like change the system?
Well, changing the system, let's talk about that. Because we have this conversation, what we're talking about before the show is we have this conversation around equity, and we have this conversation around all students, and I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm push my chips all in on both of those things. I believe in every kid, but the system wasn't designed to do that. It was designed to dole out privilege to people who already have it. And so, like I tell people, get your baseball bat or your bazooka because we have work to do. You get your sledgehammer. Now, some things, like I was saying before, are very simple. Aligning the curriculum, looking at data, bringing teachers into the same space. One thing I was really proud of is the leadership team. We spent a lot of time on the teacher leadership team when I was a middle school principal. And many, many of those people became department chairs and specialists and coordinators and directors and school principals. So I'm super proud because I could name like probably a dozen people who came out of that model and then became leaders somewhere else. That's another thing we need to do is to invest in leadership. One thing that I wish I spent more time doing, like you asked if I would go back, is identifying bright spots. Because I was so focused on improving things, I think there's a real need to identify and replicate bright spots. I'm talking about investing in our best people who often get left alone because we're doing our best with the average folks. It's fine, but the rising tide lifts all ships. You guys know that. So bringing in that investment into your best people will only bolster everybody else. So I don't know if that answers your question, but if I went back to that, I learned so much as a school leader, and the people around me I adored for the entire time I was in the public system. But yeah, if I went back, I'd probably change a lot of things I did.
It's a whole nother podcast, I think. So, I get it though. Like, if a ship is going down, you got 12 months or 12 minutes, if you want to put it that way. You got to plug the holes, and you can't really say, you know what, it's a nice paint job on top of this thing. And I get it, right? I think as a reactive system, which we are, we're definitely not proactive, and I think that's because more and more people are not. Less and less people where the traditional system worked for are coming back into the system. Like, our clients, our students, they're not, there's less and less that traditional system is working for because of the diversity of who we are as a people. I think that's a main piece. One of the things that I wanted to ask you then about, so as an internship educator, somebody who's kind of deep into the all the CTE and the work-based learning and all these different things, where basically we're looking at college and career readiness. Going back into your post-secondary plan, it's highly individualized work that I do with the team that I'm working with, right? Um, when does that change? Because there's so much, you know, industry, like kind of old school. I'm on the Ford production line and doing, school. When does this change? Is it changing? Have you seen any things like this? Because when you get in with a student, and I've had students who are aces, like just amazing kids that the system is working for and the internships are working for. I've had students who are in an internship and just getting killed in there because they're not ready to understand mindset. But then I still have the opportunity to move the needle on that kid, and it's very highly individualized. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think there?
Well, I'm hopeful. Here's the thing about me. There's two emotions that I straddle, right? Is hope and worry. So I'm worried to
Mhm.
death about kids, but I'm super hopeful about the future. And the hope comes from the fact that I get to do this conversation around college and career readiness. And I did for the last 10 years because of what my team was building. We were going all over the country presenting on the models that we built. And I'm hopeful because I go someplace and I hear about work-based learning. I go to ACTE and I'm on a panel with you and you're talking about the work that you do, which I think is fantastic and innovative. I go to a state where they're doing portrait of a graduate work, and maybe they've been doing it for a long time and they're one of the first on the scene. I'm talking to people about developing industry partners and advisory boards. I'm looking at a through line between, I think you said um, kindergarten to what was the
K through
slogan?
gray.
K through gray. I
K through
love
gray.
right?
Yeah.
K through gray. I'm looking at the through line, especially from middle school to 2 and 4 year degrees. And I'm also where I'm worried is I still hear a lot of people talking about you don't really need to go to college and you'll be okay. And the CTE programming will be the answer. And I kind of like took CTE out of our vocabulary because everything should be CTE.
Right.
Like it should all be career and technical education, and it should also all be the humanities. Like the problems that we have, though, we still need to fix are what you just described, the student schedule, trading learning for seat time. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Grading and assessment, that everything ends up in a grade book and the students are collecting points. That's not learning.
Yeah.
And so we've got fundamental structural issues that need to change. But I'm hoping that what we can do through this podcast and through conversations that lots of folks are having is bring all that together. And if you do that well, what I meant, the apprenticeships, the connection to higher ed, the work-based learning, the changing of the curriculum, the pathway development. If we can bring all that together, I think it's a recipe to change education because it doesn't fit. The system wasn't designed to do that stuff. And so if you can rebuild the system to do it, yes, we are going to change the world. And to your point about teacher retention and the future of our teacher workforce, yeah, if kids don't see themselves in school or see themselves in the curriculum or see themselves in their teacher or see themselves in somebody who's doing a presentation in the classroom, who's an industry partner, if they don't see themselves, yeah, they're not going to come back. And so we keep attracting people who this worked for, and then they keep building it the same way that it always was. No offense to anybody.
Right.
God bless educators. I love them all. I'm going to give them all a big hug. But we also need to do some work that's different than when we went to school. And by and large, it's still a lot like it was 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot like it was. So, as someone who like subs in the system, works in the system, and like not every school district is like Naperville or other innovative school districts. So like what models are you seeing that are like really working and that you love kind of promoting or talking about or working towards that kind of goes in this umbrella type space that you're talking about, because I think one of the issues in what you're talking about is there's a lot of buzzwords right now. It's jargony. People are doing different things, seemingly different things, but they're not like all uniting. So like, what would you say is working, and what are some like ways we can kind of talk about it that is helpful to others to help them kind of understand like what is the future and how can we build it?
So I think one of the future pieces is starting the career exploration in kindergarten. So we see a lot of stuff, CTE, like we were talking before, in middle and high schools. And a lot of that's because states have developed like regulations around CTE programming and the way money flows into schools. The best models are where career exploration starts in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and that there's lessons that go with that so that kids can start to explore what kinds of jobs. Like lots of people will tell you, especially from the old system, the system we graduated from, that they didn't know what they wanted to be when they grew up. Okay, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And that's okay. That's a fine thing to have. But that's a result of the system. That's not inherent in us as humans. You likely don't know what you want to be when you grow up because you don't even know it's available to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so one model is starting as early as possible with career exploration, videos, lessons, having kids see themselves. Let's say you're having a tough time diversifying your workforce in your teacher candidates. Well, let's diversify the people who come into school and present to the kids. They still get to see people who look like them, even if they don't see it in the teacher workforce. So there's a lot there's a lot of nuance in what I just described. Mm-hmm. Another model is when you get to the other end of things, high school, why do we gate the upper level coursework? Some universities even say we won't let your students earn credit unless they're juniors or seniors. That doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. That's not personalized learning.
Right.
Why is it that in some spaces we don't let kids take AP classes until they're juniors or seniors?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Why does the average transcript still say something like English 9, English 10, English 11, English 12? That doesn't speak to me as a learner or as a university partner. And so there are models that kind of break down those barriers. Like if your state says you need 4 Englishes, what are those 4 Englishes? They don't have to be 9, 10, 11, 12. And we built some things in a previous role like Gothic literature. And then, by the way, we went to a university and said, this is really rigorous curriculum. Would you give kids articulated agreement? Would you give kids 3 credits to your university if they took this class? And we found what I would say we found the others. And they were like, let's build it. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that too, in terms of how do we get kids from kindergarten into joyful experiences in the workforce versus you got to go to college and we don't really know what you're going to do.
Right. The first time, and I think I put this out on LinkedIn, or maybe I wrote it on my blog. I don't know. I'm always like kind of spilling out these very interesting things. I had an internship student, and she's amazing as a marketing person, just learning and such. And we were waiting on our reflection. We were both on a Zoom call and we were waiting for a supervisor to come on. And I asked him, like, so what are you thinking about next year? I never say, what college are you going to? Because that's changing the narrative, right? So what are you thinking, right? And she went into a very planned gap year program in Africa, understanding culture of I can't remember which country it was in Africa, but it was going there, and I'm going to teach English and I'm going to just absorb, and then we'll see what happens. And I was like, that's a win. To me, that's a win, because the narrative has now been changed to X, Y, and Z, and not it's just X. Everybody has to go here. Do you find like when you're building these programs like we are, I think it goes back to one of like the invest in your best, right? I mean, that's such a key term. I really like that term. We may even name this podcast that, Allie. I don't know, this episode, because Yeah, I've been at six different school districts, and if we want to unpack like challenges that we've had, some of the downfalls that I see, and I think it's important that we say downfalls, but we don't stick on them because we can complain forever about the system. But the downfalls are where you have school report cards and rankings that are still way into the traditional end of things, and then all of a sudden, you get on the God forbid, the U.S. News World and Report list, and then all of a sudden people just dig their heels in, and I've seen that. I've seen that in a lot of districts. How have you seen in your work, and even across the world now, because you got about a half year in on Maya Learning, where you're starting to see, hey, guess what? I have opportunity to see all these. What are different ways that people are measuring success in an innovative way outside of our kids have GPAs, they have all these average, SAT, ACT scores, blah blah blah, all that.
I think one way is, back to your gap year student is
Hmm.
measuring our success by the percentage of kids, and it needs to be 100 who have a viable post-secondary plan.
Yeah.
And I say viable post-secondary plan. I'm not opposed to a gap year if it's described the way you just did.
Right.
But if
Right.
I hear a kid say, I'm going to do a gap year, and I say, well, what are you going to do with the gap?
Right.
And they don't have an answer, I'm
Yeah.
very likely to respond, you're probably going to be poor. And
Yeah.
I know that's somewhat shocking, but like we got to quit thinking that without a plan after graduation, that our students are just going to find success. I was at a conference and a presenter, a researcher said that people who don't have a 2 or 4 year degree or an industry credential, 14% of them figure out how to make a living wage. The other 86% are poor.
Hmm.
And that's where our poor people in this country come from, and our people who are in prisons. That's a large population of people, and it doesn't have to be that way. There are lots of jobs, and there's money to go to college. Last year, $40 billion was left on the table from the federal government for low socioeconomic kids who could have gone to 2 and 4 year institutions. Many states have 2 and 4 year colleges where kids can go for really cheap or free,
Yeah.
and combinations of 2 years. And if you get this, you can go to this other institution for the next 2 years, and it's cheap or free. We have all that built, and we're doing a better job with it. But if you don't have a plan to access that when you graduate, like that's one of my passions. So I'm saying to school systems, Portrait of a Graduate, again, love it. Work-based learning, love it. Career and technical education courses, love it. I want to build these pathways for kids, but I also want to make this connection between school, K-12 school, higher education institutions, industry credentials, which many come from 2 year community colleges and technical colleges. I don't want to forget that when we say college.
Hmm.
And getting back into the economy in a joyful way, in doing something that you like or that has at least a sustainable wage. We typically worry in America mostly about graduation rates. And again, good thought, but just because they graduated doesn't mean they're going to be successful. So I'm back to that word viable, a viable post-secondary plan, something you can do and use. And it's going to work. We think it's going to work anyway. It's not going to work for everybody, but at least let's have a plan.
Yeah. Right.
What you're talking about is so interesting. I recently was reading the research on like prefrontal cortex development and how we really don't develop it fully develop until age 25. Now, the focus of this was around parenting and why parenting is so challenging, because you are basically helping your kids organize and plan and prepare and guide them in the gaps that they literally have not developed. And I think the educational system is also helping students. A good educational system should be trying to guide them to that viable pathway, because some students literally don't have the development to do that themselves. So when you're talking, I'm literally thinking like it should be measured, like this should be a huge goal, because we're doing our students a disservice. Some of them, like, they until they're 25 aren't really possible, like without a strong network or without people checking in on them, they just may not get there until 25. Well, what happens between 18 and 25? I don't know. A lot of life can happen between 18 and 25. And if you're just like, the system's like, oh, well, you turned 18 and see you later, bye. I think there's a huge opportunity in what you're saying for post-secondary and beyond high school programs and corporations and like workforce, for people to really lean in to what you're talking about. So I'm just like, what you said just like really triggered like this connection point for me. And I'm
Right.
wondering, like, you know, for the work you're doing now, right? And I kind of started this podcast talking about like school leadership and like my experience with leadership. What are ways we can kind of build the culture around that? And does it start with leaders, or, should teachers and parents and community members be advocating for this as well? And like, what can we do to kind of like create the culture and create the movement for this type of work?
Yeah, I'm always going to go back to school leadership, always, because I think, I don't think things need to start at the top. It's not top down necessarily. It can be anybody, but school leaders sometimes hold the keys, to the castle. And so I've heard from teachers in some cases that they've had a hard time changing things because the culture wasn't there for them to be able to do that even in their classroom. Um, I could do a whole rant on, I was presenting to some CTE school leaders the other night, and one of them came off mute and said, they won't let my students use cell phones anymore. And I have a lot of stuff that they need to do on their cell phone in my classroom. I didn't have a problem with the phones before. Maybe others did. And look, I get it, safety stuff and whatnot. But, you can lead from anywhere. And that was kind of my message to him, was start the conversation. I doubt that there could be a school leader who says, yeah, if you don't have a problem with it, then just go ahead and use the phone. But I'm sure there are other leaders who say it doesn't matter, it's a policy. And that's where you've got to decide if that's the environment where you want to work, in an innovative environment or not. But I think, Allie, to your answer to your question, I think it can start anywhere. It can start at the Chamber of Commerce. It can start with a politician. It can start with the community organization. It can start with students. Ask the kids. But to change the culture, it takes a leader, and that means somebody has to go first. And so if you're listening, it doesn't matter if you're the principal or the superintendent or the CTE director or the work-based learning specialist. You go first and you try something that might not work. And I follow Seth Godin, if you haven't already picked up on that. But the leader is the person who goes first, and the leader is the one who's willing to try something that might not work. And I'm especially interested in new problems, by the way. Yeah. When people say to me, well, if we do that, here's all the other problems that are going to happen. I'm like, yeah, but we have a lot of problems.
Right.
I want new ones.
Yeah. That's exactly, the try over the why. And I've heard you speak about that with some of your co-authors on other podcasts. Trust me, if you guys just look up TJ and just go to podcasts, you're going to hear awesome stuff. And along with that, I think, and Allie and I talk about this all the time. It is, as an educator, if you are an educator who is innovative, right? It may look like in the area of where you are, like just go for it, right? Just build in there, right? And if that is the environment that doesn't work for you, guess what? There isn't a lot of educators coming into the realm right now, and it's more free agency. It really is. Yes, there's going to be some change and different things like that, but when I tell people, there's two reactions I get when I worked at like 6 different schools. They're like, either this guy's got like, he's been arrested 4 times, or, he understands that he's finding a different area. And guess what? Yeah, my salary went up, down, wherever. But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm in a place that is innovative, and the environment works for me as being somebody who is innovative, right? So to your point there, I really want to, to our listeners who, if you're a leader or whatever, I mean, you can be an admin. I was an admin in an area where it was, hey, let's get kids more in the 4.0 GPA and this level of test scores. And that's fine. That if that's what that community wanted, but it wasn't for me. So, don't get mad, just go, just build. And I like that. What I wanted to touch upon though is, kind of going back to, all right, if you don't go to college, you'll be fine, da 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 da. I think colleges, post-secondary opportunities, especially traditional in the traditional sense, 2-year, 4-year, have a problem with marketing now, right? Like it used to be like, all right, you go, you're going to get a job, blah, 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 right? I've never seen more colleges come out with their own, our career center and all this stuff. And now the internships, I'm seeing great things where internships are now back down to even freshmen in some cases, right? When I was in school and we did it, it was like senior year and good luck if you liked it, right? What are some things like you can see that post-secondary options can do? And I'm going to preface this with my daughter's a junior right now, and she is getting either a lot of mail and it's desperate. You can tell a lot of these smaller universities are desperate. The bigger ones are going to be fine. Yeah, and your community colleges, some of them are taking a hit, some of them are okay. What do you see there? I mean, it's a marketing disaster for a lot of these, continuing the ivory tower look for everybody, which, that only works for some.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that we could, again, probably spend a full hour or two on. Maybe we'll do a round two on that, or maybe that's something you guys can come on and talk about on College and Career Readiness Radio, Maya Learning podcast, which is about this type of content. I do think we have a marketing problem. I also think still think, and I think some of your listeners will probably find this controversial, or they won't like me saying this, but I'll say it anyway. I still think the post-secondary plan for students who don't have a post-secondary plan should be a 2 or 4-year college institution, the community college, an open enrollment institution, someplace where you can go and you don't necessarily have to give them your test scores and a fancy transcript. If you're not going to do something that, again, back to the word viable, you should go to a 2 or 4-year college. The statistics on college are still that it's worth it in terms of the financial outcome. In fact, we had a motto at the middle school. We built this motto: education means more success. And if you look at the statistics, almost to the point, the doctorate degree is not the example, but the master's really is. The more school you get, the higher wage you will earn. And so what do I think needs to change the narrative? The other thing I'd say to you too, I'd challenge anybody, the next time you hear somebody say kids need to go to college, or all kids don't go to college, I encourage you to ask that person if they went to college. And then when they say yes, say, and did your kids go to college? And we have a lot of people walking around who went to college saying that kids don't need to go to college. Now, when I say college, I'm incorporating a way bigger umbrella.
Yeah.
The 2-year technical school where you can learn a trade, like those things, they typically live in some type of higher ed organization or institution. And so I'm not by no means like construction, plumbing. I have all that in my family and very successful people who are in the trades, and I'm an advocate for it. But that's all back to the plan.
Right.
Like, where are you going to get that education? You want to go into the military? I love it. I love it. But that's a plan.
Right.
Just saying, I'm going to leave the 12th grade and I don't know what I'm going to do, and it's not go to college, that's not a plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
I feel like
You got
I'm
Allie.
like,
She's thinking.
uh,
She's like, for
yes,
those who are
because
watching, yeah, she's
it's
head
it's
spinning. I can actually see it. It's weird.
it's we've had people on, right? Like, I love that you're taking a stance, because we had people on saying, like, you don't need to go to college. And but I like that you're like just being like, no, like, go to college if you don't have a plan. I don't mind you saying that. Like, I went to college. I kind of knew what I wanted to do required it. So, but when you're talking about like career exploration, I felt that because I didn't even know what an engineer was until I was like done with school. And I've said this on the podcast before. If I could go back in time, I would be an engineer. It's like how my brain works. But I didn't even know an engineer was a, a career option for me until I was like a junior or senior in college. And it was too late, quote unquote. I mean, like, I've found success in other areas, but I'm just saying, like, that wasn't explored. It wasn't a hot industry until around the time I was graduating. So I just think there's like a lot of opportunities. I really want to know from your experience, like, it's 2025, and like, what's the opportunity to disrupt education? Like, how are we setting it ablaze and disrupting this year? Like, what comes to mind? Where would you go in the work that you're doing to disrupt?
So if I'm disrupting education for students, I'm going to go back to doing things in the classroom and in advisory periods that are typically not happening. And what you're describing, Allie, is very typical, meaning unless we have a platform and a program of work for career exploration, your average kid knows what their mom and dad and aunt and uncle do, and that's about it. And they might even know that you could work at AT&T, but they don't know that there's a programmer job there, and there's a web developer job there, and there's a linesman job there. And so how do we disrupt education? By teaching kids what's available to them. I think not knowing what you're going to do is a byproduct. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It's a byproduct of the system. And if we could, our parents, our families don't know what jobs are available, and neither do the teachers, by the way. So, and that's not their fault. So we need a program work. That's what Maya Learning does. Of the many things it does, soup to nuts, comprehensive college and career planning tool, and helping teachers and counselors to help students to learn more about what's available and to learn skills that they're going to need that aren't just English, math, science, and social studies, durable skills that are being written into these portraits of a graduate. Back to me being hopeful for the future. But I would start by saying there's things we need to teach kids if we're going to disrupt the education for kids. There's things they need to learn in school that should be the responsibility of the school that they're not going to learn at home and they're not going to learn in their communities. And the less privilege you have, the less likely it is that you're going to learn those things. So that's where I would disrupt education for students. If I was going to disrupt education for principals, I would say every principal needs a coach. Out of the gate, every principal, every assistant principal needs a coach, at least a mastermind or a group coach, but one-to-one coaching is still the number one way to do it. Somebody who did the job and did it effectively, who's your coach, not just checking the box for a mentor, but getting principals regular coaching. And that's a super important thing for the future of disrupting education. Because if they're not coached on new models of how to think and how to change, which is why we wrote 7 Mind Shifts for School Leaders. Mm-hmm. If they're not coached on that, they are going to continue doing what they know how to do, which was done to them. And you can't disrupt that way.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask Allie. So you've got a lot of, I know, like, so this is what we do, TJ. If you're watching, we just take a ton of notes. We're, what are your final thoughts here, Allie?
I mean, I love the coaching model. I there's lots of final thoughts I could have. I think just
This is going to end
bringing
up a
it.
series. We're going to do something
I
with
know
TJ.
it's great. Um, Two things. One, I love the coaching model. It's so great. And I also heard, and a lot of our guests this year had industry backgrounds. Your
Yeah.
background in corporate restaurant management
Hmm.
is like so useful, and people like diversifying and your background and then going heads down and doing work that you love will open doors. How we get people into those doors and understand the doors that are available to them is the opportunity to disrupt. And I absolutely love that. So I just want our listeners to know, like, if even if you're quote unquote adjacent to education, there's so much work that education could benefit from your expertise. And you're a testament to that. And so I love this episode. It's so good. There's so many nuggets that people like,
Yeah.
they're gonna have to listen to it twice. They're gonna
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
to listen to it
I
twice.
would say so. And I know I mean, we are definitely, this is just the beginning
Right.
of this relationship. But I want to touch on, kind of wrapping things up here, how people can connect with you. But before I do, obviously, if you want to know what, a lot of these strategies, I mean, TJ, you have 6 books that are authored or co-authored, it sounded like you had 2 more, on the horizon. How can people find you and all these, valuable assets that you've created?
No, I'd say the first place you can find me is at theschoolhouse302.com. That's all one word, theschoolhouse302.com. That's where you can get our newsletter, Focus Ed podcast. Our books are all listed there. Our blogs come out from that site, and so it's easy to follow. The second thing I'll say is go to mylearning.com and follow College and Career Readiness Radio. If you're listening to this, you've got to be into that. It's a new podcast for Maya, and the stacked number of guests is just already awesome. And I want to have you guys on that show as well. So we'll do an agreement with that. You can find me on Twitter. I still say Twitter for sure. I live on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I think LinkedIn is the best social platform right now for connecting with people. I ping people, I DM people on LinkedIn and just ask them if they want to do a 30-minute shop talk.
Mhm.
And the people who respond, not everybody responds, but the
Yeah.
people who do are always interesting, always fun. I always learn something. And we typically do a round 2, 3, and 4. And so you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to do, a 30-minute session with anybody who wants to talk about this stuff. And then look, you can call me on my cell phone, 608-347-6954. So there's a bunch of ways that you can find me. Theschoolhouse302.com, obviously Maya Learning, and then you just got my cell phone, and take a look at LinkedIn.
You're like Gary Vee out there, man, throwing the cell phone out. I love it.
One time I was on a podcast, and I do that on a lot of podcasts. I was on a podcast and a dude called me.
Yeah, there you go. So, well, there you have it, folks. TJ, I want to thank you so much. Obviously, hopefully this just ignited some people, and I know it will, where they're going to start to either continue their action, go deeper, or even start something. That's what we're all about here at Disrupt Education. But appreciate you sharing your story and all your knowledge on the podcast today.
Thank you both. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope to do it again.
All right. I think that'll happen. So for Allie Dahl, I'm Peter Hostrasser. Thank you all for listening to the Disrupt Education podcast. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Disrupt Education podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Are you ready to disrupt the educational arena you're a part of? For more ways to get involved in the work we do here at Disrupt Education, check us out at disrupteducation.co or find us on LinkedIn at Peter Hostrasser or Allie Privet.
Our mission here is to help facilitate and amplify changes in the educational system through local initiatives and help you scale them into community movements. Our building network of disruptors in education are working to move beyond scores and grades as the only measure for student learning. If your school district, college, campus, or organization is looking for facilitators of this work, reach out on our website or social media.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback on this week's episode or any episode, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, taking risks, and most importantly, disrupting education.